After bus driver Walter Harmon made the shocking discovery under Rory Carson's seat and exposed the abuse she had endured under her stepfather's care, he hoped the girl could heal from the horrors she had faced at such a young age. But soon, Walter discovered that Rory's journey to reclaiming her normal teenage life was far from over, and the nightmare had only just begun. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Walter Harmon adjusted the side mirror of his yellow school bus as he navigated the quiet morning streets of Willow Glenn. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the pavement, its weak light doing little to dispel the morning chill. 5 months had passed since that day, the day that had changed so many lives, including his own. He glanced down at his clipboard, checking the name of the next passenger, Rory Carson. Walter pulled the bus to a gentle stop outside a modest 2-story house, with a well-maintained garden. Unlike the blue-sided house where he'd once dropped Rory off, this one was in a different neighborhood, farther from school but still within his pickup range. After the incident with her stepfather, Greg, Rory had moved in with her mother, Laura, and grandmother, Eleanor. The family had settled in Eleanor's house after Laura gave birth there, following what Walter understood was a family tradition. Walter honked the horn once, a gentle alert of his arrival. He waited patiently, his eyes fixed on the front door. After a few moments it swung open, and Rory stepped out. She looked different from 5 months ago. Her face had filled out a bit, and she no longer had that perpetual hunted look in her eyes. But there was still a reserve about her, a quietness that seemed out of place in a 14-year-old. Eleanor, Rory's grandmother, followed her onto the porch. The older woman fussed around Rory, straightening her uniform and fastening her belt properly. Even from the bus, Walter could hear Eleanor's crisp, admonishing tone. "You didn't finish your breakfast again today," she complained, her expression clearly displeased. "I spent all that time preparing it for you." She straightened Rory's collar with nimble fingers. "You'd better finish your lunch. Young lady, you're still too thin." Rory nodded silently, her eyes downcast. A moment later, Laura appeared in the doorway, cradling a baby in her arms. The infant, Greg's biological child, was bundled in a pale blue blanket. "It's okay, Mother," Laura said to Eleanor, her voice gentle but firm. "Take it easy. Rory can eat as much as she needs." Eleanor pursed her lips. "People nowadays are too soft with children. Back in the day, you'd get a slap for not finishing your plate," she muttered, but stepped back from Rory nonetheless. Laura leaned forward and kissed Rory's cheek. "Have a good day, sweetheart," she said warmly. "I love you." "Love you too, Mom," Rory replied softly. Rory waved goodbye to her mother and grandmother as she walked toward the bus. Laura and Eleanor waved to Walter as well before retreating into the house. Walter noticed how Laura's eyes lingered on her daughter, filled with a mixture of love and concern. As Rory climbed the steps onto the bus, Walter greeted her with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Rory." "Morning, Mr. Harmon," she replied in her quiet voice, managing a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Rory made her way down the aisle to her usual seat, the same one she'd always chosen, directly above, the air vent. Walter found it interesting that despite everything that had happened, she still gravitated to that spot. Perhaps it was simply the comfort of routine. Walter closed the door and pulled away from the curb, merging back onto the row. In his rearview mirror, he could see Rory sitting quietly, her gaze fixed on the window. Unlike the other children, who chatted animatedly around her, she kept to herself, a small island of solitude in the noisy sea of adolescence. As he navigated the familiar streets toward Willow Glen Intermediate School, Walter became aware of whispers and stifled laughter. Glancing in his mirror again, he noticed several students looking in Rory's direction, their heads bent together conspiratorially. One boy mimicked wiping tears from his face, causing his friend to snicker. Walter frowned. He knew that despite the school's strict anti-bullying policy, Rory's situation had made her a target. The details of what had happened 5 months ago had leaked out, as secrets inevitably did in small communities like Willow Glen. The mysterious nature of her absence, followed by her equally mysterious return, had fueled endless speculation. among the student body. "Keep it down back there," Walter called, his voice firm but not unkind. "And make sure those seatbelts are fastened properly." The whispering subsided temporarily, though Walter knew it wouldn't last. As he drove, his thoughts turned to everything that had transpired since that fateful day. The first few months. After the incident had been consumed by police work, gathering statements, collecting evidence, pressing charges against Greg and the other men involved. Walter had given his testimony multiple times, recounting how he'd found the birth control pills and followed his instinct that something was wrong. Greg's lawyer had filed for a psychiatric evaluation, delaying the trial. The last Walter had heard they were trying to arrange a plea deal with reduced sentences, using Greg's supposed mental health conditions as their defense. But as far as Walter knew, the plea deal had been denied, and Greg and his accomplices were still facing harsh sentences. Walter hadn't kept up with the case lately. His own health had begun to deteriorate, an early onset of lung cancer that had shifted his focus to his own mortality rather than the fate of Greg Whitmore. Besides, he'd been confident that there was no way those men would escape justice. Not with 2 eyewitnesses to what had happened that day at the park maintenance shed. From conversations with Laura, Walter knew that Rory had been seeing a child therapist to process the emotional trauma inflicted by her stepfather. The girl had made progress, but healing was a slow process. At a red light, Walter glanced back at Rory again. She was studiously ignoring the other children, but her posture was tense. As he watched, a crumpled paper ball sailed through the air and landed on her seat. Suppressed laughter rippled through the bus. "That's enough," Walter said sharply. "The next person who throws anything will be walking to school, understood? Everyone buckled up and face forward." The bus fell silent. Walter caught Rory's eye in the mirror and gave her a small nod, which she returned almost imperceptibly. When they finally arrived at school, Rory darted off the bus before any of the other children, eager to escape the confined space. Walter remained in his seat, checking off student names on his paper list. When he looked up, he spotted Rory walking toward the school entrance. A tall boy stepped into her path, blocking her way. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the interaction. The boy looked like a senior, tall, with a confident posture, clean haircut, and a sharp uniform. After a moment, Walter recognized him. Nathan Wells. He had been on Walter's bus route last year, now a final-year student, usually quiet but always polite. Rory's posture was tense as Nathan leaned slightly toward her, hands tucked in his pockets. She pulled back a little as he said something, but Nathan moved closer again, speaking low and smiling faintly. Too charming, too deliberate for Walter's liking. Rory said nothing in response, but her hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of her sweater. Walter stood up, feeling a familiar sense of unease. Something about the boy's body language triggered an old instinct in him, the same instinct that had led him to follow Greg's car 5 months ago. He stepped down from the bus, excusing himself from the students still lining up to have their names checked, and crossed the lot toward Rory. "Everything all right here?" Walter asked, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. Nathan straightened up, that practiced smile still in place. "Good morning, Mr. Harmon. Is Nathan troubling you, Rory?" Walter asked directly. Rory shook her head quickly. "No, it's fine. I just wanted to talk to her for a minute," Nathan explained, his voice smooth and respectful. Walter nodded slowly. "Okay, but please, no touching. School rules." Nathan gave both Rory and Walter a reassuring smile. "Of course, sir." He turned back to Rory. "You'd better get to class, the bell's about to ring." Rory glanced at Walter, and to his surprise, her expression held a hint of annoyance. "I don't need your protection, Mr. Harmon," she said quietly. "I can stand up for myself." Before Walter could respond, Rory had turned and was walking quickly toward the school entrance as the first bell rang. Nathan followed behind her, maintaining a respectful distance. Walter watched them until they disappeared inside the building. He returned to the bus, completed his paperwork, and signed the necessary forms. But the encounter with Nathan and Rory's unexpected response bothered him. He wasn't sure whether to feel pleased that Rory was finally making connections with peers or concerned about the nature of Nathan's interest in her. After everything she'd been through, the last thing Rory needed was another predatory male in her life. But perhaps he was being overprotective. Perhaps Nathan's interest was genuine and respectful. Walter hoped so for Rory's sake, but the nagging feeling of unease persisted as he finished his morning route. With a few hours to kill before the afternoon pickup, Walter sat in the school staff lounge, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. His mind kept circling back to Greg Whitmore. It had been months since he checked on the case, assuming that justice would take its course. But what if it hadn't? The uncertainty gnawed at him until he couldn't ignore it anymore. Setting his coffee aside, Walter made his way to the school library. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Patel, smiled warmly as he approached her desk. "Good morning, Walter. What brings you to my domain today?" "I was hoping I could use one of the computers," Walter explained. "Need to look something up." Mrs. Patel's eyes twinkled. "For you, I can do better than those ancient public terminals. Come on back to the staff room. You can use my desktop. Much faster." Walter followed her into the small room behind the circulation desk, grateful for her kindness. He settled into the chair she offered, and as she left to help a student, he typed Greg Whitmore into the search bar. The results loaded quickly, and Walter's blood ran cold. The headline of the top article read, "Local Men Released on Probation After Mental Health Plea." It was dated 3 weeks ago. Walter clicked on the article, scanning it with growing dismay. According to the report, Greg and 2 of his accomplices had been released on probation with GPS monitoring after their plea deals were finally granted. The judge had accepted the defense's portrayal of Greg as a troubled man with unresolved trauma, and since this was technically his first offense, he had been given a second chance. "How did I not know about this?" Walter muttered, scrolling through the article for more details. The men were required to wear ankle monitors at all times and observe strict curfews. They were prohibited from contacting Rory or Laura directly or indirectly and were required to stay at least 500 feet away from their residence, workplace, and school. Walter pulled out his phone and dialed Laura's number. After 3 rings, she answered. "Walter, is everything okay? Is Rory all right?" Her voice was immediately concerned. "Rory's fine," Walter assured her quickly. "But I just found something troubling. Did you know that Greg was released on probation 3 weeks ago?" The silence on the other end of the line told him everything. "What?" Laura finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, that's not possible. We would have been notified. The article says he was released with GPS monitoring after his plea deal was accepted. Mental health conditions, first offense, the usual excuses," Walter confirmed. "I never received any notification," Laura said, her voice shaking. "Slightly." "Are you certain?" "I'm looking at the news article right now," Walter replied. "It says the judge granted the plea 3 weeks ago." Laura was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was more controlled, but Walter could hear the undercurrent of fear. "Even with monitoring, we need to be careful. There's always a chance he might try something. I'll keep an eye on Rory during school hours," Walter promised, "and I'll report anything suspicious immediately." After ending the call, Walter continued his research, looking for any additional information on Greg's release conditions. He found nothing more specific than what the first article had provided. With a heavy sigh, Walter closed the browser and returned to the main library to thank Mrs. Patel. As he stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, he checked his watch. 11 a.m., still hours before the end of the school day, but recess time for many students. To his surprise, Walter spotted Rory slipping out of a side door of the school building. She glanced around furtively before hurrying across the quad toward the fence line. A moment later, Nathan appeared from the same door, following her. Walter's instincts kicked into high gear. He quickened his pace, following at a distance. When he rounded the corner, he saw Rory and Nathan standing close together near a gap in the fence that separated the school grounds from a wooded area beyond. "Rory," Walter called, approaching them with determined strides. Both teenagers jumped, turning toward him with startled expressions. "What do you think you're doing?" Walter demanded, his voice firm. You can't just leave school grounds during hours. Rory's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. We were just talking. You can talk inside the school, Walter countered. He turned to Nathan. You should know better. You're a senior, for goodness sake. Nathan had the decency to look ashamed. Sorry, Mr. Harmon. We weren't going to go far. That's not the point, Walter said. Rory, please return to the building immediately. With a frustrated glare at Walter, Rory stalked back toward the school. Nathan made to follow her, but Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. Not so fast, he said quietly. What's your interest in Rory? Nathan shrugged off Walter's hand and glanced around at the street. No offense, sir, but that's between her and me. Walter watched as the boy jogged to catch up with Rory, occasionally glancing around the corners as if he was looking for something or someone. The two slipped back into the school building, leaving Walter alone with his growing unease. During his lunch break, Walter sought out Ms. Margaret, Rory's homeroom teacher, in the staff canteen. The young woman was sitting alone, grading papers while she ate her salad. Mind if I join you? Walter asked. Ms. Margaret looked up with a smile. Not at all, Walter. Please sit. As he settled into the chair across from her, Walter explained what he had witnessed earlier. I'm concerned about Rory, he concluded. This boy Nathan seems to be showing a lot of interest in her, and after what happened with her stepfather, Ms. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. I understand your concern, especially given what Rory's been through. But this is actually the first I've heard of her making any connection with a peer. She's been so isolated since returning to school. That doesn't mean we should let her leave school grounds during hours, Walter pointed out. Of course not, Ms. Margaret agreed. I'll speak to her about that. But perhaps if you see them together after school, you could give them some space. This might be Rory's first step toward becoming more confident and open to socializing again. Walter considered her words. Perhaps he was being overprotective and overthinking. After all, teenage romance was a normal part of growing up, something Rory deserved to experience in a healthy way. As he made his way back to his bus to prepare for the afternoon route, Walter spotted a familiar figure hovering near the vehicle. Nathan stood by the bus, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly waiting for someone. Nathan, what are you doing here? Walter asked, approaching the boy. Nathan started, not having noticed Walter's approach. Oh, Mr. Harmon, I was looking for you, actually. Walter raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Nathan nodded, pulling an envelope from his pocket. I wanted to ask for your help. I'd like to surprise Rory. He held up the envelope. I wrote her a letter, and I was hoping you'd let me place it on her usual seat for her to find after school. Despite his misgivings, Walter found himself chuckling at the boy's earnestness. Ms. Margaret's words echoed in his mind. Perhaps this was exactly what Rory needed. All right, he said, unlocking the bus door. You can put it on her seat. Nathan's face lit up with a genuine smile. Thank you, sir. He bounded up the steps and carefully placed the envelope on the seat where Rory always sat. As he passed Walter on his way out, he added hastily, Please don't read it. Walter held up his hands. I have no business reading your private messages. I respect your privacy. Thanks again, Nathan said. I should get back to class before the bell rings. Walter watched him jog back toward the school building, feeling a mixture of concern and hope. Young love was such a tender, vulnerable thing, especially for someone like Rory, who had experienced the darkest side of human relationships. Let's hope this is the good kind, Walter murmured to himself as he prepared for the afternoon route. The final bell rang at 3:15 p.m., and within minutes, the school grounds were flooded with students eager to begin their weekend. Walter stood by the open door of his bus, clipboard in hand, checking off names as students boarded. Rory was the last of her class to arrive. As she stepped onto the bus, Walter noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the slight slump of her shoulders. Despite the therapy and the support of her mother, recovery was clearly an ongoing process for her. Good afternoon, Rory, Walter greeted her. Afternoon, she replied softly, making her way down the aisle to her usual seat. Walter watched as she noticed the envelope, For a brief moment, confusion crossed her face, followed by curiosity. She picked it up and slid it into her backpack just as a group of girls passed by, giggling and pointing. "Look, the freak got a love letter," one of them stage whispered. "Who'd write to her?" another replied with a snicker. "That's enough," Walter called firmly. "Everyone, find your seats and buckle up." As the bus filled with chatter and laughter, Walter started the engine and pulled away from the curb. In his rear-view mirror, he could see Rory discreetly opening the envelope, shielding its contents from her neighbors. As she read, a rare smile spread across her face, transforming her features and reminding Walter of the innocent young girl she should have been allowed to remain. The bus had been on the road for about 10 minutes when Rory approached the front, clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. "Mr. Harmon?" she asked hesitantly. "Can you let me off when we reach Maple Street? It's before my stop." Walter frowned slightly. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Rory. I'd need permission from your mother." "Why do you want to get off there?" Rory hesitated, not meeting his eyes. "Just need to make a stop before going home." Walter suspected the request had something to do with the letter from Nathan, but he couldn't simply deviate from his route without proper authorization. "I'm sorry, but I'll have to take you to your regular stop. Maybe you can ask your mom about it when you get home." Rory's face fell, but she nodded in understanding and returned to her seat. As Walter navigated the suburban streets, dropping off students one by one, he noticed a dark sedan driving erratically on the opposite side of the road. The car swerved dangerously close to the bus, forcing Walter to veer slightly to avoid a collision. Walter honked his horn sharply, heart pounding as the car sped away. "Reckless idiot," he muttered, checking to make sure all his passengers were safe and secure. Eventually, the bus approached Rory's stop. Laura stood at the edge of the driveway, waiting for her daughter. As Rory stepped off the bus, Laura embraced her warmly. "Grandma took the baby to the doctor," Walter heard Laura tell Rory, "so we can have some quality time together, just us." Laura looked up at Walter and smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Walter. We appreciate all you do." Walter nodded, watching as mother and daughter walked arm in arm toward the house. There was something healing in their closeness, a bond that had perhaps been strengthened by the trauma they had endured together. As Walter pulled away from the curb and headed back toward the bus depot, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Despite everything that had happened, Rory had a loving mother and a safe home. Perhaps that would be enough to help her heal. After returning the bus and clocking out for the day, Walter got into his personal car, a well-worn Buick that had seen better days. He was eager to get home, make a simple dinner, and perhaps watch a baseball game on TV. As he drove past Eleanor's house, Walter noticed the driveway was empty, no sign of Laura's car. He assumed they might be out enjoying a mother and daughter day, but just a few blocks later, something unexpected caught his attention. Two familiar figures walking side by side. It wasn't Laura and Rory, it was Rory and Nathan. They weren't touching, but they were clearly deep in conversation. Walter instinctively eased off the gas, a quiet unease creeping in despite Ms. Margaret's reminder to give them space. After a moment's hesitation, Walter pulled over and called Laura. "Hello," she answered on the second ring. "Laura, it's Walter. I just saw Rory walking with a boy from school, Nathan. Did you know about this?" "Yes," Laura replied, her voice relaxed. "Nathan came by about 20 minutes after Rory got home. He asked permission to take her for a walk to the neighborhood garden. I thought it might be good for her to start opening up to friendship." "I see," Walter said, watching as the pair turned onto the path leading to Willow Glenn Community Garden, a peaceful public space with winding paths, flower beds, and benches tucked among the trees, enclosed by a decorative iron fence with several gates around its perimeter. "I wanted to give her a little freedom," Laura continued, though Walter could hear the anxiety in her voice. "But I'm nervous too. This is the first time she's shown interest in spending time with anyone from school." Walter debated internally. His first instinct was to leave Rory be, to give her the space to develop normal relationships. But then he remembered how Nathan had asked her to leave school grounds during class hours, a red flag that continued to nag at him. Why would he suggest something like that when they barely know each other? Walter murmured, more to himself than to Laura. "What was that?" Laura asked. "Nothing," Walter replied quickly. "Listen, I'm nearby. If it's all right with you, I'll keep an eye on them from a distance just to be safe." Relief was evident in Laura's voice. "Would you? That would be wonderful." "Walter, thank you." After ending the call, Walter parked his car where he could observe the main entrance to the garden. From his vantage point, he could see Rory and Nathan walking along one of the paths, stopping occasionally to examine a particularly beautiful flower or interesting plant. "You're being paranoid, old man," Walter muttered to himself, guilt prickling at the edges of his thoughts. It felt uncomfortably close to stalking a teenage girl, a realization that reminded him of his younger days, when he'd taken the same cautious approach with his own daughter whenever someone asked her out. All that vigilance had paid off, he told himself. She was now married, building a happy life with a family of her own. Now, after everything that had happened 5 months ago, those instincts were reignited, and the idea of simply driving away and leaving Rory vulnerable was something he just couldn't do. So he remained in his car, watching the garden entrance, and wondering how long he should wait before accepting that his concerns were unfounded. 20 minutes passed, and Walter was seriously considering leaving, or at least moving to a nearby cafe where he could rest his aching back while still keeping an eye on the garden. Just as he was about to start his car, a dark sedan sped past, taking a sharp turn around the garden's perimeter. With a jolt, Walter recognized it as the same car that had swerved dangerously close to his bus earlier. Alarm bells rang in his mind as he remembered that there was another entrance to the garden on the far side, where the car had just disappeared. Following his instincts, Walter quickly rummaged through his glove compartment, finding an old mechanic's hat and a pair of sunglasses, remnants from his days fixing engines before he became a bus driver. He put them on, hoping they would provide at least some disguise as he investigated. Walter exited his car and walked briskly toward the garden, maintaining what he hoped was an inconspicuous pace. As he approached the secondary entrance, he caught sight of Literary, the baby in Rory's story. A small bundle cradled in Greg's arms, a stark contrast to the cruelty Walter knew him capable of. "Remember our agreement," Eleanor was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet garden. "Keep your end of the bargain and don't be reckless this time. Soon enough, you can be reunited with your son permanently." Greg adjusted the baby in his arms, his face softening as he looked down at the infant. "And you remember yours?" he replied, his voice rougher than Walter remembered. "From where I'm standing, there's no way you could convince Laura to forgive me. I want that portion of inheritance you promised otherwise." He made a slicing motion across his throat with his free hand. Walter felt bile rise in his throat. This couldn't be happening. Eleanor, the stern but seemingly protective grandmother, was conspiring with the very man who had abused her granddaughter. Was she involved in what happened 5 months ago too? "There's no need for violence," Eleanor replied coldly. "We have a common goal, getting rid of that stinky teenage girl. A grieving woman's heart can be as soft as clay, and you just need to be at the right place at the right time, saying the right things." She reached into her purse and withdrew what looked like a check. "But most of all, I want you to make her happy, whatever it takes. Just make her happy and be a happy family, even if I have to pay you." Walter felt a tickle in his throat, the precursor to one of his coughing fits. He swallowed hard, fighting to control it. This revelation was staggering. Eleanor wasn't just strict, she was actively plotting against her own granddaughter. But why? What could possibly drive a grandmother to such betrayal? Greg cradled the baby, a smile playing on his lips. "Don't worry about a thing. Once I get this ankle bracelet off, I'll be out of here, beyond the reach of the police. My men are ready. We'll take the girl and ship her far away." He nodded toward the garden paths. "And the boy's ready too. He's with her." Walter's blood ran cold. Nathan was involved in this? Had his interest in Rory been part of a twisted plot all along? "I see a possible loose end here," Eleanor said coolly. "Deal with him." "We will," came the reply. Eleanor took the baby back, carefully securing him in the car seat. "I need to go. Laura's calling to check on us. Make sure you succeed this time." There won't be a next time if you fail again. As Eleanor drove away, Greg turned to his companions. Walter recognized them now. They were the same men who had been with Greg in the maintenance shed 5 months ago. One of them handed Greg what appeared to be a cutting tool, presumably to remove the ankle monitor. Walter couldn't hold back his cough any longer. A racking spasm shook his body and he ducked behind the tree, trying to muffle the sound with his handkerchief. When he peered around the trunk again, Greg and his men were looking in his direction, suspicion clear on their faces. Not waiting to see if they had recognized him, Walter hurried back to his car, coughing violently all the way. He fumbled with his keys, finally starting the engine and pulling away from the curb with a screech of tires. He had to find Rory immediately. As he drove around the perimeter of the garden toward the main entrance, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered promptly. I need to report a potential kidnapping in progress, Walter said urgently, his voice strained from coughing. Willow Glenn Community Garden. The perpetrators are Greg Whitmore and 2 men, currently in violation of a restraining order. There's a 14-year-old girl in danger. Units are being dispatched to your location, the dispatcher assured him. Please stay on the line and provide more details. Walter parked his car in an empty lot near the front gate and rushed inside, phone still pressed to his ear. As he described Greg, his companions, and the situation, his eyes darted frantically around the garden until he spotted Rory and Nathan sitting on a bench near a small pond. I've found the girl, Walter informed the dispatcher. I'm going to get her out of here now. Sir, you must stay. But without waiting for a response, Walter pocketed his phone and hurried toward the teens. Rory looked up in surprise as he approached, her expression quickly shifting to annoyance. Walter, what are you doing here? We need to go, Walter said firmly, reaching for her hand. Right now. I'll explain later. Rory pulled back. No, you can't just show up and drag me away. I'm having a conversation with Nathan. Rory, please, Walter implored, aware that every second counted. This is serious. We need to leave immediately. Before Rory could respond, the roar of an engine shattered the peace of the garden. Walter turned to see Greg's SUV barreling down the gravel path directly toward them, crushing flower beds and narrowly missing statues as it approached. The vehicle skidded to a halt just yards away. Greg and his men leaped out, and before Walter could react, Greg charged forward and struck him in the face with a heavy blow. The cutting tool connected with Walter's temple, sending him crashing to the ground. Though dazed, Walter remained conscious, blood trickling from the wound as he struggled to regain his footing. Through blurred vision, he saw Greg's men grab Rory, who screamed and fought as they dragged her toward the SUV. Nathan stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion. You just told me to keep her here and talk to her, he said to Greg. What are you doing? One of the men thrust a wad of cash into Nathan's hand. Job done, kid. Now get lost and be quiet or you'll regret it. Walter staggered to his feet and lunged toward Rory, desperation driving him forward, but one of the men slammed him. Back down. He hit the ground hard, a violent fit of coughing tearing through him. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder with every passing second. Police! Walter shouted, hoping to frighten Greg and his men. They're coming! Greg cursed, glancing at the approaching sirens. He quickly yanked up his pant leg, exposing the ankle monitor. With a few deft movements of the cutting tool, he severed the device and tossed it into the nearby bushes. Move, 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 he barked at his men, who were already forcing a struggling Rory into the back seat of the SUV. The vehicle sped away, taking the far exit just as the first police car pulled up to the main entrance of the garden. Walter rose shakily to his feet, pressing his handkerchief to the wound on his temple. Nathan approached him cautiously. Mr. Harmon, wait. Stay away from me, Walter growled, his voice hard with anger and fear for Rory. You sold her out. You'll answer to the police. 2 officers approached at a run, weapons drawn. Walter pointed in the direction the SUV had fled. They went that way. They have Rory. The officers radioed the information to their colleagues, and 2 police cars immediately gave chase, sirens blaring. The remaining officers stayed with Walter, requesting medical assistance and beginning to question Nathan. "Sir, what happened?" "Here," one officer asked Walter, who was now sitting on a bench, fighting against the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. Between labored breaths, Walter explained everything he had witnessed: Eleanor's betrayal, Greg's escape plan, and Nathan's apparent complicity in the scheme. "The boy was paid to bring her here," Walter concluded, glaring at Nathan. "He set her up." Nathan shook his head frantically. "No, I mean yes, they paid me, but I didn't know what they were planning. I was just told to bring her to the garden. That's all I did. I did nothing wrong, sir." The officer took Nathan firmly by the arm. "Be quiet. You'll have plenty of time to explain at the station." He guided the boy to the police car, instructing him to wait in the back seat. Returning to Walter, the officer pulled a small evidence bag from his pocket and carefully collected the discarded ankle monitor from the bushes where Greg had thrown. "Soy, this will help build the case against him," the officer explained. "Removing a court-ordered monitoring device is a serious offense. Evidence that he wasn't acting out of mental health issues but making deliberate choices." Another officer approached, speaking into his radio. "We need additional units. At the Parker residence immediately. Possible accomplice, female, late 60s or early 70s. Walter nodded, relieved that the police were taking Eleanor's involvement seriously. "I suspect she's the one who orchestrated this," he told them. "I overheard her talking with Greg. She hates Rory for some reason and was willing to pay Greg to get rid of her." The paramedics arrived soon after, cleaning and bandaging Walter's wound. "You'll need a few stitches," one of them informed him. "It's not deep, but head wounds bleed a lot." As the medical team worked, Walter couldn't stop thinking about Rory. Trapped in a car with the man who had abused her, the man her own grandmother had conspired with against her. His hands trembled with a mixture of fear for the girl and rage at those who had betrayed her. "Do you think they'll catch up to them?" Walter asked the officer. "We've got multiple units in pursuit and roadblocks being set up," the officer replied. "We'll find them, sir." Walter nodded, praying the officer was right. He couldn't bear the thought of failing Rory a second time. Despite the paramedics' recommendation to go to the hospital for stitches, Walter insisted on driving himself to the police station. His wound had been cleaned and temporarily bandaged, but he was determined to give his statement to the police first. He promised to get proper medical attention afterward, agreeing only to be guided to the nurse's room at the station for a more thorough checkup. As he walked into the station, Walter immediately spotted Eleanor being led to the booking desk. Her normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, her face a mask of indignation, as an officer asked for her personal information and explained the legal proceedings she was facing. Farther down the corridor, Laura paced back and forth, one hand pushing a baby stroller while the other was pressed to her forehead in obvious distress. When she caught sight of Walter, her face crumpled and she started toward him, but an officer gently intercepted her. "Mrs. Carson, we need to ensure you're properly treated. There's a doctor and nurse on duty here who can attend to you. Before we finish your statement and allow you to speak with the other witnesses," Walter made his way toward the nurse's room, where the officer had directed him. Inside, the doctor on duty gestured for Walter to sit as she prepared the materials for his stitches. She worked efficiently, her hands moving deftly as she cleaned the wound and performed the stitch. However, Walter's thoughts were far from the present moment. His mind kept returning to the sight of Eleanor and Laura, both facing their own battles in the grim police station corridor. As the doctor applied the final bandage, Walter nodded his thanks, his gaze momentarily flicking back toward the chaos. Outside, a different officer approached, gesturing toward an interview room. "Mr. Harmon, if you'll follow me, we'd like to take your statement now." Walter followed the officer into a small, stark room with a table and 4 chairs. Outside, second officer was already seated, a recording device set up in front of him. "Before we begin," the first officer said, "I wanted to update you on the situation. We've deployed additional units to pursue Mr. Whitmore. They've been in chase for about 15 minutes now." Walter's stomach clenched with anxiety. "And Rory, is she still with them?" The officer nodded solemnly. "Unfortunately, yes, the girl is still in their custody." Walter clenched his fists beneath the table, struggling to maintain his composure. As long as Rory remained with those men, Her life was in danger. What if they decided to simply dispose of her rather than risk capture now? The officer continued. We'd like to take your formal statement about everything that happened today, starting from this morning. Walter took a deep breath and began recounting the day's events. He described noticing Rory with Nathan at school, discovering that Greg had been released on probation, and following his instincts to keep an eye on Rory at the garden. He explained in detail what he had overheard between Eleanor and Greg, including their apparent conspiracy against Rory. When Walter mentioned that neither he, Laura, nor Rory had been aware of Greg's release from custody, both officers exchanged surprised glances. You weren't notified? One of them asked. The court is required to inform victims when perpetrators are released. We had no idea, Walter confirmed. I only found out today when I did some research online. The second officer made a note. Our forensic team is currently searching the Parker residence. They found a victim notification letter from the court hidden in Eleanor Parker's personal desk. It appears she deliberately concealed this information from her daughter and granddaughter. Walter shook his head in disgust. I still don't understand why. Why would she hate her own granddaughter enough to put her back in danger? We hope to determine that during our interrogation, the officer replied. But before the police could finish his question about Nathan, they heard a commotion outside. How could you? Laura was saying, her voice breaking with emotion. She's your granddaughter, your own flesh and blood. As the police stepped into the corridor, Walter witnessed an intense confrontation between Laura and Eleanor. Two officers stood nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. How could... You? Laura repeated, her voice breaking with emotion. She's your granddaughter, your own flesh and blood. Eleanor's face was cold, her posture rigid despite her disheveled appearance. I hate that girl, she spat. She looks just like her father, your first husband, that worthless man. The way she watches people quietly, always so depressed. She'll grow up to be just like him. Why do you always marry these stupid, incapable men? Even Greg, that cowhead. He can't even do his job properly. Ma'am, that's enough, one of the officers said firmly, stepping forward. Save it for the interrogation room. Your lawyer will be here soon. As Eleanor was led away, she caught sight of Walter. Her eyes narrowed with hatred, but she said nothing as the officers escorted her down the corridor. Laura stood frozen, her face ashen with shock at her mother's vitriol. The baby in the stroller began to cry, disturbed by the tension and raised voices. After Walter completed his statement, he was led back to the waiting area. Walter approached Laura, who was rocking the stroller back and forth in an attempt to soothe the crying infant. Her own tears fell silently, mixing with her son's louder distress. Let me help, Walter offered, gently taking over the rocking motion so Laura could wipe her eyes. I can't believe this, she whispered. My own mother and Greg working together against my daughter. I know Eleanor never liked Evan, Rory's father, but I never expected... Before Walter could respond, a commotion at the entrance of the station drew their attention. Several officers were escorting three men in handcuffs, Greg and his two accomplices. Greg's face was contorted with anger, his breathing labored as he occasionally suppressed a cough. Laura stepped forward, her body trembling with rage. I hope they lock you up for life this time, she shouted at Greg. No more probation for you, you monster. Greg's eyes darted to Laura, then fixed on Walter. With a sudden lunge forward, he spat a thick mixture of phlegm and saliva onto Walter's shirt. The officers immediately tightened their grip on Greg, pulling him back. You deserve this, old man, Greg snarled. Walter remained calm, his gaze steady. Be smarter next time, Greg, if you get another chance. The officers continued leading Greg and his men down the corridor toward the booking area. As they disappeared around a corner, another small group emerged, an officer guiding Nathan, who walked with his head down, shoulders slumped into feet. Upon seeing Laura, the boy stopped. Mrs. Carson, he said hesitantly, could I speak to you for a moment? I want to apologize. The officer looked to Laura, who nodded stiffly. I'm so sorry, Nathan began, his voice breaking. They offered me money to bring Rory to the garden. At first I thought it was just an easy way to make some cash, but then…" He swallowed hard. "As I got to know her better, I realized she wasn't a freak like everyone says. She's actually really cool, really smart. I didn't know they were going to hurt her, I swear I didn't." Laura stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I gave all the money back to the police," Nathan added, pulling his empty pockets inside out as if to prove his point. "I don't want anything to do with it." After a long moment, Laura nodded once, acknowledging his apology without necessarily accepting it. The officer gently guided Nathan away toward an interview room. Another officer approached them, his expression grave. "Mrs. Carson, Mr. Harmon, I'm afraid I have an update about Rory from the hospital." Walter felt Laura stiffen beside him, her hand reaching out to grip his arm. "Rory has been taken to Mercy Hospital," the officer continued. "During the police chase, she attempted to escape from the moving vehicle. Her leg became entangled in a rope the kidnappers were using to restrain her, and she was dragged for a short distance before the car stopped. She struck a tree and was subsequently rolled by the momentum, narrowly avoiding being hit by the pursuing police car." Laura's knees buckled and Walter quickly supported her weight, guiding her to a nearby chair. "How bad is it?" Walter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Multiple broken bones and a concussion," the officer replied. "The medical team has treated her, but she hasn't regained consciousness yet. She's in critical condition." Laura buried, her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. The baby, sensing his mother's distress, began crying anew. Walter placed a comforting hand on Laura's shoulder, feeling utterly helpless in the face of such devastating news. After everything Rory had already endured, to suffer this additional trauma seemed unthinkably cruel. "I want to go to her," Laura managed between sobs. "Can I go to the hospital?" "Of course," the officer said. "We can provide a police escort if you'd like." Walter helped Laura gather her things and secure the baby in his carrier. "I'll come with you," he offered, "if that's all right." Laura nodded gratefully, squeezing his hand. "Thank you, Walter, for everything." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Walter couldn't help but reflect on the twisted chain of events that had led to this moment. A grandmother's inexplicable hatred, a stepfather's malice, and a young boy's greed had combined to create a perfect storm of danger for Rory. Yet there had also been moments of kindness and courage. Laura's unwavering love for her daughter, Nathan's belated remorse, and perhaps Walter hoped, his own determination to protect a child in need. Now all they could do was wait and hope that Rory would find the strength to survive this latest ordeal. The police escort guided them through the evening traffic with efficient urgency, lights flashing but sirens silent, out of respect for the baby, who had finally fallen asleep after his extended crying jag. Walter sat in the back seat with Laura, who cradled her son's carrier with one arm while clutching Walter's hand with her free hand. "I should have known," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I should have seen the signs with my mother, the way she treated Rory, always so cold, so critical." "Don't blame yourself," Walter said gently. "Eleanor hid her true feelings well." Laura shook her head. "But I'm her mother. It's my job to protect her, and I've failed her over and over again, first with Greg and now this." "You haven't failed her," Walter insisted. "You got her away from Greg. You've supported her through therapy. You've shown her love and stability. That's not failure, Laura." They fell silent as the hospital came into view, a sprawling complex of buildings illuminated against the darkening sky. The police car pulled up to the emergency entrance, and an officer opened the door for them. "A detective will meet you inside," he informed them. "They'll need to take Rory's statement when she regains consciousness." Laura nodded, her face pale but composed as she lifted the baby carrier. Walter stayed close beside her as they entered the building, navigating the maze of corridors with the help of staff until they reached the intensive care unit. Outside the unit, a doctor in surgical scrubs was waiting for them. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Chen. "Mrs. Carson?" she asked, stepping forward to meet them. "I'm Dr. Chen, the physician caring for your daughter." "How is she?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "Rory has suffered multiple fractures and a concussion," Dr. Chen said directly. She's past the immediate crisis, but she's still unconscious. We expect her to regain consciousness in the next few days, though she'll need extensive physical therapy due to her injuries. Laura swayed slightly, and Walter placed a steadying hand on her elbow. "Can I see her?" Laura asked. Dr. Chen nodded. "Yes, but I should prepare you. She's on a ventilator to assist with her breathing, and there is significant bruising, especially on her face." Laura straightened her shoulders. "I need to be with my daughter." They followed Dr. Chen into the ICU until they reached Rory's room. Laura gasped softly as they entered, her free hand flying to her mouth. Rory lay motionless in the hospital bed, connected to multiple monitors and machines. Her face was swollen and discolored with bruises, and a ventilator tube protruded from her mouth. Her arms and one leg were encased in casts, and what was visible of her skin was either bandaged or marked with angry abrasions. Laura approached the bed slowly, setting the baby carrier on a nearby chair before gently taking Rory's uninjured hand in hers. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mom's right here. You're safe now." Walter stood back, giving mother and daughter a moment of privacy. The beeping of the monitors created a strange rhythm in the otherwise quiet room, a constant reminder of how precarious Rory's condition was. As they stood vigil, a nurse entered the room. "Excuse me, but we heard the patient mumbling something a few minutes ago. She was asking for her letter." "Letter?" Laura repeated, confused. The nurse nodded. She was quite insistent, even in her semi-conscious state. "My letter. Need my letter. Does that mean anything to you?" Walter suddenly remembered the letter from Nathan, the one he'd left on her bus seat today. She must have it in her backpack or pocket. The nurse retrieved a plastic bag containing Rory's personal effects, which had been removed when she was admitted. Inside, they found a crumpled envelope, the paper stained with dirt and what looked like blood. "May I?" Laura asked, her hand hovering over the bag. The nurse nodded, and Laura carefully extracted the letter. As she unfolded it, her eyes filled with fresh tears, but these seemed different from the ones she had shed earlier. "Oh," she breathed, reading the teenage boy's awkward handwriting. After a moment, she handed the letter to Walter. "It's not what we thought," she said softly. Walter adjusted his glasses and read. Then he lowered the letter, his heart heavy with the realization that what might have been Rory's first genuine friendship had been corrupted by Eleanor and Greg's twisted scheme. They had preyed on Nathan's youth and greed, turning what could have been a positive connection for Rory into yet another betrayal. Even if his intentions became better over time, Walter said quietly, he still took money to lead her into a trap. Laura nodded, her expression conflicted. "I know. But at least she got to read this first, to know that someone at school might actually like her for herself." She carefully folded the letter and placed it on Rory's bedside table, where she might see it when she woke up. "We need to rebuild our family after this," Laura said eventually. "Without my mother, without the constant fear." She looked down at her sleeping daughter. "I want Rory to feel safe and loved. I want her to have a normal teenage life, with friends and crushes and all the ordinary problems kids are supposed to have." "She will," Walter assured her. "It will take time, but she'll get there." As Walter gazed through the window at Rory's still form, he reflected on everything that had transpired since that first day he noticed her crying on his bus. This case had taught them all painful lessons about neglect and the importance of protecting those most vulnerable. But it had also demonstrated the power of vigilance, of one person refusing to look away when they suspected a child was in danger. He might be just a school bus driver, but he had made a difference in Rory's life, perhaps even saved it. And in doing so, he had been reminded of a truth he had always known but sometimes forgotten, that each of us has the power to change a T-ice life for the better, if only we pay attention and have the courage to act.